For the last few days, as we've looked at Russia and Ukraine, what we found out is that there's more to this story, and I believe in really looking at the truth, looking at history, like not what this guy says what happened, but looking at what really happened. And then, if you go back and you actually look at the history of Ukraine and Russia for yourself, not just what that guy said, but actually look what happened, it all starts to build a story. And the reality is many things I'm going to talk about, you like me say, well, I remember that happening. Like, these are things we remembered happening. And in the United States, there's definitely things they're going to want to tell you, and it's not what really happened. So I want to say start by saying I'm not a sympathizer of anybody's agenda, really. I'm always pro-Jesus and everything. I just want to get to the truth of what's happening. And so I'm just going to kind of go through the events that led up to this Ukrainian-Russian thing. Now, I'm going to start by kind of talking about, the ethnicities, the cultural breakdown, the ethnic breakdown of Ukraine. And I'm going to put up some graphs as I'm talking here too. But ultimately what you see is the eastern side of Ukraine being mostly Russian-speaking or significant ethnic Russian population. Everything in yellow, everything in brown. What you'll see in brown is the majority. So it's not just that there's mostly Russian people that would say that they are ethnically Russian. Now, the next slide I'm going to show you is a survey that was taken by the International Republican Institute in Ukraine of Ukrainian citizens, ultimately asking them, would you rather Ukraine join NATO or would you rather have them join Russia? How would you vote? And what you see here is cities to the west are the furthest on top of this list, and cities to the east are at the bottom. Dark blue is people that voted for Ukraine to join NATO. Red and light blue are people that voted for Ukraine to join Russia, with the red identifying as the Customs Union of Russia. So they're even identifying themselves as a kind of a different institution altogether. Now, this next slide is the way that people voted in the 2004 Ukrainian presidential election. The western side voted for Viktor Yushchenko, and the eastern side voted for Viktor Yanukovych. And then if we go to the 2010 election, you got the western side voting for Yushchenko and the eastern side voting for Yanukovych. So with that being said, let's look at the cause. So let's just lay out what Ukrainian people look like first. And now let's take a look at the actual cause. I believe that the primary cause, and I think most people who really understand the real history of what's taking place in Ukraine and has taken place, is that it's the eastward expansion of NATO, specifically the cause. Now, if you look here, what you see is countries joining NATO over time, whereas in the founders, of course, were the dark green, and then after, from 1950 until 2000, you have the light green joining. But it is in 2000 to present that we really start to see some problems, where you see Romania, Bulgaria, specifically Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, because what you literally have NATO bordering Russia. Right now, you have countries that are NATO, a part of NATO, bordering Russia. Now, I want to take a moment and talk about what's referred to as the U.S. Monroe Doctrine, which ultimately says that nobody puts enemy military in the Western Hemisphere, period. It's a doctrine. It would be a declaration of war. And here we are, NATO, the U.S. alliance, doing the exact same thing to Russia. So I want to start off by saying I don't think anybody should be surprised that Vladimir Putin is not thrilled with NATO expansion. Now, of course, we see that Ukraine is not a part of that, nor is Georgia, but here's where it really starts to get bad. In April 2008, there was the Bucharest summit, and on April 3rd, it was kind of as this summit, it was a NATO summit in Bucharest. As it came to a close, NATO put out this quote exactly: NATO welcomes Ukraine's and Georgia's Euro-Atlantic aspirations for membership in NATO. We agreed today that these countries will become members of NATO. Obviously, Russia is not okay with this, and they respond by saying Georgia's and Ukraine's membership in the alliance is a huge strategic mistake which will have most serious consequences for pan-European security. Vladimir Putin specifically said Georgia and Ukraine becoming part of NATO is a direct threat to Russia. If we look at how history played out, that was April 3rd of 2008. In August of 2008, Russia and Georgia were in a full-out war, primarily because Georgia had kind of said, well, hey, we're joining NATO. We got nothing to worry about. The U.S. has totally got us. Europe has got us. And it caused a war, and it was catastrophic. It was a terrible situation for everybody involved. And ultimately what happened is, Russia walked in and clobbered Georgia, and nobody supported them. They just simply clobbered them. Now, let's kind of take a look at what's taking place in Ukraine, because now, okay, Ukraine, that's, they said Ukraine and Georgia. Ukraine at least said, whoa, okay, we're not going to mess with you, Russia. We're cool. But there's a history there too, because what ultimately took place was the leading up to, or the fostering of, what was referred to as the Orange Revolution in Ukraine. What took place on February 22nd of that year is very significant. So let's kind of look at what took place. Well, Yanukovych says to the UE deal, the UE wanted them to join them, and he says no. And he's, of course, a pro-Russian president. That's November 21st of 2013. Protests start in Kiev. By January, you got your first two deaths of protesters. By February 18th, you have 26 deaths. By February 20th, you have 40 deaths. Now, lots of people are dying all of a sudden in Kiev. By February 21st, the EU works out a deal for a May election to remove Yanukovych from power by allowing them to hold elections in May. And the killing continues in the Maidan in Kiev. By February 22nd, and this is the significant part, Yanukovych flees for Russia. So they literally have staged a coup. The EU and NATO staged a coup, and it worked out. Somehow it worked out. So then, of course, they put in their pro-EU president, who wins by a landslide. Only 5 days later, on February 27th, Russian units seized checkpoints in Crimea. 5 days later. You don't think these things are related? It's only 5 days later. This is Russia trying to secure up what they believe should be secure. 5 days later, they seized checkpoints in Crimea. And a lot of people wondered how they get there, but a lot of people don't realize they actually were already there. They had a leased naval base in Crimea. They were already there. So when the sun came up and they were there, they'd been there for a long time. All they did was come out, is all they really did. By March 6th, Crimea Parliament votes to join Russia. By March 18th, Russia stamps its approval. Yep, Crimea is now part of Russia. Let's start with there's no way you're getting Crimea back. There's no way you're getting Crimea back. So shortly after, only a few days later, fighting breaks out in eastern Ukraine. Russia has been physically involved and been in eastern Ukraine since then to support, to some degree, an independence in those regions. So what is Russia's response? And, if we're looking, well, what would Russia do? Well, first, they take Crimea. You're not getting it back. Second, they don't want to overthrow Ukraine and take Ukraine because Putin's way too smart. He's way too smart for that. But he's sending a message ultimately that says to the West, back off or it's going to be devastating. If you continue down this path, we will wreck this country and take the eastern territories anyway. And that's mostly Russian-speaking people and people that claim to be Russian anyway. And I think that's what we're seeing right now. Well, what motivated Russia to do this? Well, there's no way they're going to let NATO be that. I mean, you got this massive landmass, first of all. Now, I'm going to show you this graph real quick. Why is this a big deal? Why is this a big deal? Well, here's Europe's dependence on Russian gas. Over a quarter of their natural gas is not only coming from Russia, but going through Ukraine. So, of course, Russia isn't going to let this massive land border become part of NATO. And then in addition to that, somehow NATO is in control of the flow of his natural gas. I don't think anybody should be surprised by any of this. I don't think there's anybody, I think Obama, Trump, Biden, I think all of them, every time Putin did something like this, they were just in shock at what was taking place. And I just want to remind you, there's no way people are putting foreign militaries in the Western Hemisphere. But that's, again, I'm not being supportive of anybody. I'm on Team Jesus. But whenever the Western leaders talk about spreading democracy, what Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping of China hear is, this is how we're going to conquer your regime. So I hope this video helps. Just a quick history lesson of what's taking place, the real. Again, this isn't just what the spin you're getting from CNN or Fox or BBC or whatever you're spinning. This is a real history lesson. Like, these are things that really took place. So there you go. Love to hear your thoughts on all that. Put in the comments below. Like this video, click like and subscribe. Feel called to support this channel with Patreon. That link is also below. But the most important part of this channel is we take prayer requests, so never hesitate to send that in. Thank you for watching this episode of God, Family, and Guns. And as always, love God, love your family, and love God.